Hello, folks. Welcome to
Hello.
the Cult Bar, everybody. So I'm Doug, and as you know, Renee, our fabulous lead over here. So we're gonna do some stuff tonight, talking about the Sarah Lawrence cult, by documented and stolen youth documentary on Hulu. So I'm gonna hand it off to Renee here to talk about our trigger warnings.
This is like a whole basket. So we're going to be talking about sexual assault, coercion, sex trafficking, um, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, physical abuse, lots of references to child sexual abuse, but as far as we know, none of it actually happened, which we'll get into.
Mhm.
And then, of course, as always, it's a high control, high demand relationship, which can be triggering for a lot of people. And I think I've got it all. So, and if I didn't, and we start talking about something that's upsetting you, of course, we don't want you to stay on our account. You can leave, come back in a few minutes, wait until it goes on YouTube and fast forward through it, or just not watch it at all. We're cool with it. We want people to be happy, not hurting.
Yes, this is for us and to enjoy, and for the folks that tune in with us, we want you to enjoy it as well. So yeah, if it is something that's too much, please just step away. It's fine. We completely understand that. So as usual, you want us to start us off with some news.
What's the news?
What's the news? Oh no.
So, as you may or may not know, we're in the middle of the 30th anniversary of the Waco standoff, where the FBI went after the Branch Davidians. It actually, it was a really long standoff, which is part of the reason it's so famous. But it took place between February 28th and April 19th. And in the news, it's going to shock you to your very core. Donald Trump did something really offensive. And he held a campaign rally at Waco in the middle of the 30th anniversary. As anybody who's like got like a little more than surface knowledge of Waco knows, it's a big deal for white supremacists, sovereign
Mhm.
citizens, those types. Um, we'll get into more detail on it next month because we're actually doing Waco next month. Nothing
Yeah.
like a month late, but whatever. Um, but yeah, so he went and he held a campaign rally there, and it worked. It got all of the racist revved up. And in the New York Times article, there was like a quote about someone saying that he's like a messenger from God. Like it is. Um, and then, in secondary cultish news, indictment and arrest. So there you go. Not
Hmm.
because he went to Waco, but it's
That
related.
would have been funny if he would have gotten arrested for doing that. But that's probably the only thing he hasn't done illegal. So whatever.
Right. He's never had to stand up with the FBI
Yeah,
yet.
yet. So yeah. We got a lot to get into, but why don't we start off with what we're drinking before we get into that? Because we got to have a theme drink, right? So what do you have?
Okay, so this whole thing starts at a college. A lot of it takes place at a college. So I did something insane. I made I made jungle juice, which was the drink of choice at the frat I partied at when I went to college. And it's probably a big part of the reason that I am now back in college at 38 years old. It is, well, so I found a recipe online and I was like, this is way too classy. This is not what we were drinking there. So what I made was shot of vodka, shot and a half of rum, Hawaiian punch, orange pineapple juice, and 7 Up. And it delivers on its promise that you can't taste the alcohol, which,
That's the point.
yeah.
Oh man. So, does it live up to your college memories?
I mean, I used much higher quality liquor. I used Tito's and Zaya rum, I think. Yeah, Zaya. And so it's very nice. I don't
Mhm.
remember it being this nice, and it probably wasn't.
Mhm. Yeah. So I went a little bit different because, as we'll find out later as we talk, one of the big themes for Larry Ray, who was the leader of the cult, was he kept trying to get people to confess that they were poisoning him. Poisoning was a very big thing with him for some reason. I don't know if he thought he was being chased by Vladimir Putin or what. So what I made was something called sweet poison. So this is it's a very tropical drink, which is not in keeping with this, but I just did it because of the name.
We
So
both.
basically,
Oh,
yeah. So it's rum, coconut rum, blue curacao, pineapple juice, and then got a little pineapple wedge. And as I told Renee before the show, I actually found Luxardo cherries, which I've never had before, and then I put it in this college fruity drink. So I'm not sure how that's gonna go. But the Luxardo cherries, my word,
they're really
they're,
good.
they're a snack all by themselves.
I would say I eat them plain. I like eat them out of the jar.
Yeah. So cheers to this. I'm a little worried because I'm not a big coconut fan, or
Not a
especially
not a coconut fan.
Yep, lots of coconut.
Yeah.
So, like, the thing is, each drink has like an ounce of regular rum and 2 ounces of coconut rum.
Oh, so you should have just flipped it.
I should have flipped it. And the blue curacao, you're actually supposed to put it at the bottom, which is why it's, and then pour the drink over top of it over cubes, which is why it has a little bit of delineation.
I
But
like that. Yeah.
yeah, so it's not my jam, but it's not terrible. So, kind of like my feelings after watching this documentary. Not terrible. Well, yeah, it actually really was. So, yeah. So, did you want to kind of give us a overview, or did you want me to do that?
I feel like watching this documentary was that horrible feeling you have when you find out that someone like someone you care about or someone you thought was your friend is like a horrible bigot
Hmm.
like, for hours straight while you watch the documentary. Like, it was so I don't know. I went into this and I think you came from the same place, Doug, is like we knew that it was a sex cult. We knew it took place at Sarah Lawrence, and we knew that one of the students' dads was living in the dorms. That's all I knew going in.
Me too.
Seemed crazy enough. Wasn't even close to how crazy it actually was. And then like as I was talking to Doug this morning, like I found some articles that expand on what the documentary covered, and those are even crazier too. So all I can say about this is strap in. Um, yeah, so I'll start with they're living in a dorm.
Mhm.
They're freshmen. No, sophomores.
No, they were freshmen when this all started
Okay.
because that's how. Well, actually, I think what it was they were freshmen when they arrived, and they all became friends. And then their sophomore year, they decided to live in this Sloanham building.
Oh,
So
that's right. Okay.
yeah, I think that's how it's getting. Yeah.
So they live in the dorms, and this is important. The dorm they live in is off the beaten path. And this girl, Talia's father, is in prison. And she just tells everybody what a wonderful man her father is. He rescued her from her abusive mother. He was a whistleblower. He's done all these amazing things. And when he gets out of prison, he has a place to live, but he basically moves in there. He's there like 4 out of the 7 days of the week. Lots of, I'm like the house dad. I cook nice dinners. I bring you guys stuff that you couldn't afford. And I give really good advice. And that's kind of where this starts, is he
Mhm.
kind of makes himself the mentor, which allows him an in to become, I was going to say, like to become an abuser, because there's no nice way of saying it. And eventually he moves these kids into an apartment he's staying at that he claims is his, but it's not. And it just gets wilder and wilder from there. And they move with him to a third location even before this all starts to fall apart. And it takes place over about a decade. I'll say this too, the issue I had with documentary is it was really hard to follow how much time had passed between
Yeah.
the story points.
Yep.
So you don't get a great idea of how fast everything moved. You only get a good idea of how fast the beginning moved.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. It gives you a. I mean, it's only 3 episodes, so they didn't really go like they tried to give you a good portion of the crazy, but I don't think they would have had to have many more episodes to hit all the crazy.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it doesn't give you a great sense. Like what I do think in the first episode where they give you a sense of just how fast these kids kind of fall under this guy's like trance or whatever you want to call it. Like it's pretty
Yeah.
fast.
This is me reading between the lines, and I could be way off base, but the sense that I got when they're showing us the kids that, because not everybody in the dorm went for it. There were several
Nope.
people in the dorm who were like, that guy's weird. I don't know why he's here. But they didn't feel comfortable enough like reporting him, which they're 18, 19 years old. That makes sense. But they show the families and stuff, and it does kind of seem like he kind of targeted the kids that came from rougher backgrounds. Like the Isabel was there on scholarship, comes from poverty, single parent home. Santos comes from, I believe, an immigrant family. They don't speak English at home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there's just a lot of, as you're getting into it, it's like they weren't the kids that fit right in at a private college. And I read between the lines on that because like I went to a private college where I drank jungle juice and was politely asked to leave because I couldn't keep my grades up. And I didn't fit in because I was like, you know, I didn't have the money. Like people were literally driving Hummers and like BMWs on campus. And I was like, I got a new bike. So I kind of felt like I was getting that sense of kind of the same, they're there and they're excited to be there, but like the environment was a little bit different. Like these might be kids who really were looking, because he made himself like the adult to learn from. And maybe kids who felt like they needed an adult outside of their family to do that, whereas other kids maybe didn't feel that way.
Yeah, it's very much looked like he was targeting. I mean, a lot of these cults work this way too, where they target the most vulnerable people. And
Right.
like Claudia was also in that group, and she was kind of just this artist free spirit kind of person, but at the same time was kind of doing her own thing. Was part of the group, but not fully. It felt like, and forget if it was Isabella. Well, Isabella was also like more really like Isabella was seemed to be more the outcast. Like she kind of was like didn't like completely fit in, but she was friends enough with him that she had a place to be. So yeah, it just seemed like he was targeting those folks. I agree.
So I think it's a good as time as any to get into the. Well, we didn't talk about how he convinced these kids that he was actually super respectful and smart. And like here's your fucking PSA, okay? Like
Yes.
he says, I was in the Marines, I did this, I did that, I know the commandant, I have whatever. I was in the CIA and I ran all these secret ops, and then I was a whistleblower and I busted these dirty cops, and then as a result, all these bad things happened to me. That's why I went to prison, whatever. Dude, first of all, like I did not need to wait for the episode where it reveals that all of that was bullshit.
Yeah, we kind of knew that from the giddy up.
It's like the moment somebody starts listing these kind of accomplishments, they're full of shit. Like people who do secret ops in the CIA don't tell you. They're not allowed.
No.
Like,
No, not at all.
yeah, immediately I was like, oh boy, what's the truth behind this? And then we find out that none of it is true. Perhaps most interesting, what we found outside the doc is he was in the military. He was in the Air Force for 19 days before, I suppose, he was politely asked to leave, like I was from University of Pacific.
Yeah, I'm guessing so. And we should mention that he had like these things where like he said he was part of like the Kosovo peace arrangement and knew like Gorbachev personally and had pictures with him and Gorbachev, but it was because he became friends with his interpreter. It wasn't like he was like
right.
Gorbachev was like, hey man, come on over here and hang out. Let's have some vodka. It wasn't like that at all. He just happened to be tangentially friendly with his interpreter.
I have a picture with Chuck Palahniuk. We don't get dinner together, you know?
Yeah, you could, I mean, and it was funny. It was like, it was a little bit early for Photoshop, but Like I was like, maybe that's not the way it is. And then we come to find out later that there's somebody who was part of that sort of stuff said, yeah, if you were even slightly or involved in the peace talks or you could get anybody could get that piece of paper showing that stuff. So it's not a big deal. But
Yeah.
he used us all to wow the kids. They made it seem like he was just this guy who knew how to get stuff done.
Well, the other thing too is like, you know, when I was a teenager, I would encounter people who said like really unbelievable things about their military service or whatever. And I would know that they were full of it, but I wouldn't know how to like prove it. Right. Whereas
Mhm.
like now I would be like, oh, you're in the Marines. What unit were you with? Like, what was your
Yeah.
MOS? Like, I would have questions and I'd be like, oh, you're full of shit. But at, 18, I wouldn't have known that.
Yeah.
So I kind of, like, I think we need to focus on the fact that these kids were young. It's their first time being away from home.
Very
And
impressionable.
his daughter, we don't see her, we don't hear a lot about her part in
No.
all of this. She didn't choose to be part of the documentary. Um, but she seemed pretty like he was working on her. I mean, he had her whole life to work on her. And
Yeah.
she
Yeah. I
bought
mean, I have a question for you about her before we move on. Is I don't know if you've ever heard of the Electra complex.
I have.
And I am wondering if Talia has a bit of that going on. And for those that
Well,
don't know, that the Electra complex is basically the inverse of the Oedipus complex.
right. I don't think so, but it's hard to know.
Yeah,
Uh,
because we didn't hear from her.
right. Um, what I feel like parts of this story come out is he, to her, is the parent that fought for her. So we get this bits of this story in the documentary, and then some of this is from our outside research. But when she was young, her parents divorced, and Larry Ray, her father, made all sorts of extreme accusations of abuse. I haven't actually been able to track down exactly what they were. There is a hint that some of it was sexual abuse and some of it was plain physical abuse. And she went along with it, and her 4-year-old sister gave up the game because she was, she's a 4-year-old. So someone says, tell the truth. And then they asked, does your mommy hit you? And she says, Daddy told me to say that. So that was their in, and they investigated it. And of course, it was all baloney. So during the time that this was going on, though, they both lived with him. And he was controlling the narrative, obviously, because they're living with him. They don't have visitation with their mother because maybe she's horribly abusive. Kids go back to live with their mother, and Talia chose actually to live in youth shelters instead.
Mhm.
Because how dare you do this to my father, basically, was her stance. And at one point, he kidnapped her. I've gotten a couple different stories on that, so I don't want to give like detail, but we know it was either he was supposed to bring her back from visitation and didn't, or he actually took her from a foster home. I'm not 100%.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of this like, look at how much my dad loves me. Look at what he's willing to do for me. That's what I got from it.
Mhm. Yeah. It was just a vague thing. I just wondered if you thought because of the idea of everything being kind of revolving, also eventually, as most of these do, end up revolving around sex. And I just didn't know if maybe that was
I
not
feel
that I'm not saying he was doing inappropriate things with his daughter. Just I wonder if there's a little bit of weirdness that way.
well, so I'm glad you brought that up actually, because I didn't think about it until you said it. But one thing we do get in the middle of the documentary is during the custody dispute, they did a psychological evaluation on him. And it's chilling.
To say
They're
the least.
basically you cannot operate in a clinical sense with this person because they're so manipulative and frankly dangerous. But he had two diagnoses in that. One was narcissistic personality disorder, and the other was histrionic personality disorder. And histrionic personality disorder is I should have brought up my like DSM page because I'm going to forget some of it. But it's a very dramatic, over the top, a lot of this fantasy stuff that we see him pull off with these kids. But in
Mhm.
addition to that, it usually involves a lot of inappropriate sexuality.
Which does
So
happen.
Yeah, and so, but part of getting that diagnosis over a different personality disorder is that it will occur in like any situation. So like let's say you're getting your taxes done with your tax accountant and then you're going to try and be sexual or try to seduce the tax accountant or your boss or whatever. And so that was really illuminating. You don't see that diagnosis a lot, and you actually don't see it a lot in men because secrets in the name. It's a very misogynist diagnosis. Um,
Yep.
there is an estimate that this about the same number of men and women have it, but it is more frequently diagnosed in women. So whatever. But yeah, so inappropriate sexuality and over the top drama and literal drama, not like conflict, but is
Mhm.
part of his personality disorder. It's part of his diagnosis.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely get the narcissism bit, and the histrionic bit does come in because as you watch this documentary and you start going deeper into it and just see just how he, as I said in my post on Facebook, I don't think I've ever seen a more complete teardown of people like I did in this. Now, there's probably more, but it just the way he systematically just fucking destroys them is beyond anything I've seen. So,
And the level of destruction.
mhm,
And in some of the cases, we do know it happened really fast. And it's really, you don't really get how he did it because you're hearing from people who got out and processed it. And then in the case of the two worst ones, one, we'll get to it, had only been out of his influence for like a few weeks by the time the documentary wrapped.
mhm,
And the other one is in jail now because she never did. So like you don't have that clarity per se to look back and be like, he did this and then this and then this, and the result was that, that, and that. You have people who are just like, I don't know what's going on. And I read an interview with a filmmaker, and he said that was part of it, that it was so difficult to get that, because part of the reason they chose the people reached out to do the documentary in the first place is because they wanted to process it out loud and show their side of the story,
mm,
that they were not just a bunch of idiots that ran off and joined a cult, but like how it actually happens and how it happened to them specifically.
yeah. Well, so essentially, he kind of hooks them in at this college,
Mhm.
and they're in this building, which basically it's the people that live there. It's not like only one gender. Everybody just like men and women
Yeah,
and all the folks. So it's interesting in that capacity because when I went into this, I thought Sarah Lawrence was a female
I
only
did too.
school, and I
I
was a little confused.
did too.
And then yeah, so the bit about being in the college thing, as you said, he kind of wows them with, "Hey, I'm kind of your dad now. I'm here. I can make you meals. Here, you don't want it. You eat ramen. How about I give you a steak?" Like he was just doing stuff like that, just to ingratiate himself to them. And like you said, some of them were like, "Fuck this. I don't. That guy's creepy. I'm not doing shit around him." And some stuck around for a little bit and then got out. But then there's the people that just stayed, which I'm trying to remember. I think initially it was what 4 or 5 folks that were like part of the core group.
Yeah, so it was his daughter Talia, Isabel, Claudia,
Santos,
Santos, and Dan.
Dan. Dan's a tough one. I felt so bad for that guy.
Was
I
it Dan?
feel bad. I feel bad for them all, but like
I don't have it like easily viewable on my notes, but was it Dan or Santos that was dating Talia?
that was Santos. He
Yeah.
was dating Talia, and so I think Santos is the first one that kind of seeks guidance from him,
Well,
like in earnest, I guess.
yeah, because what he starts doing is he starts giving Santos a, well, he said at first it seemed like Larry didn't like him because he was dating Larry's daughter. And then that relationship ended. Now they can be buddy buddy, they can be cool.
Yeah.
And so Santos is like getting life advice from him, and he somehow turns that into giving everyone advice, which then turns into, oh, Isabel needs a lot of help. And because, again, they are 18 years old, they don't stop and go, what the hell is this grown ass man doing in a closed bedroom with an 18-year-old girl for 12 and 14, 16 hours at a time,
Mhm.
spending the night, staying up all night? What the hell?
Yeah.
And it does appear, I mean, my first thought is like, of course, he's having sex with her, but it does appear that, like, he was purposely keeping her from sleeping. He wasn't helping her cope with things. He was planting ideas about things that didn't happen. Like, he convinced her that she was sexually molested and her mother didn't do anything about it. And that was the first person that he was able to break away from their family.
The first. He did it with all of them.
Right. And she didn't even talk to her mother. She called her mother. She said, I'm not coming home. I'm going to stay with this guy who, it's one of my friend's dads, blah, blah, blah. And her mom was like, oh, okay, trying to be supportive. And then she says, well, I'm going to let you talk to him. First of all, red flags fucking everywhere, right? Like, if my kid wouldn't talk to me and hand me off to somebody I've never heard of before that moment, I'd be like, all right, you're not coming home. I'm going there. But maybe I can say that because I saw this documentary before I ever thought about it. And we'll say that.
Yeah.
So he gets on the phone and he tells her, it would be really bad for her to come home. And she might kill herself if she comes home. And it's because you were such a bad parent. And she was, sexually abused and you didn't do anything about it. And the mother actually believes that she was sexually abused and she didn't know. That her daughter was sexually abused and she didn't know. And her daughter's like, oh my God, like, yeah, if it's going to be that upsetting for her, it's going to be, like a mental breakdown, then she should stay where she feels safe. But it was bullshit, as it becomes clear.
Well,
That's his in with it's a very Teal Swan, right?
yeah, very much. And also, the mother said that she had substance abuse issues, but when she was 3, she got clean. So I think her mom thought that, like, maybe that did happen when I wasn't functioning because I was, on drugs and alcohol.
And
So
when they talk to Isabel later, Isabel presents it like her mom was strung out right up to the day she left for college.
yeah,
And again, I mean, we only have Isabel's word and her mother's word, but part of what Larry was doing was wearing these kids down until they would believe whatever he told them. And he would tell them really horrible things about their childhood, and they would start to, like, share the delusion, basically.
hmm
So by the end of it, all of the kids involved in this little group think that they've been raped, they've been sex trafficked as children, they've been beaten, they've been starved, they've been neglected, like, you name it.
hmm
Um,
yeah. It's a lot because you again, the documentary didn't have enough time to, like, really kind of get into how, like, you get the sense of how he did it to some degree, but, like, the level of manipulation he did is not that's not an easy thing to do. But one of the things you talked about before too was what he did was kind of this, I think you called it the Darbo thing, where it's like there's this playbook of, like, sleep deprivation, food deprivation, doing all these things to weaken you physically, which also weakens you mentally, which makes you more susceptible to just stop it. Whatever you say, I'll do it. And we see this later where he's just making people confess to doing things they
in
clearly didn't do.
Yeah, wildly, like, it starts out with, like, property damage. Like, you scratched my refrigerator, you have to pay for it or whatever. But it gets into, like, I'm involved in this conspiracy against you. I was sent here to poison you. I was sent here to spy on you. Like, but the Darbo thing is actually, it's a communication thing, and it's common in people with narcissistic personality disorder who are not treated. Which is like, if someone comes to you and is upset with you, you deny, you attack, and then you reverse victim and offender, which was something he did a lot as well. Like, nobody could say, you know, you kept us up all night and didn't let us eat anything. That would become, well, I had to do that because blah, 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 blah. And you did this to me and you did that. And, by the way, where's the money you owe me from scratching the refrigerator? And it would turn into this big thing. And the sleep deprivation thing is particularly interesting because he wasn't sleeping either, because he was like chewing up handfuls of Adderall through the whole time.
Yep.
And he was dosing them with it as well.
Yep.
And we don't really know when that starts either.
No, it's not really clear.
Yeah, it gets brought up once they've already moved, like off college campus to the apartment and then to this other property. But I'm inclined to believe it probably started earlier because he was already keeping them up all night. He was already, I mean, that was part of the plan, like you said. It was a very like, anything I can do to break these people down. And then I can start pulling the strings. Then I can start getting them to do whatever I want.
Yeah, and you talked about how it started with just the property damage. It was like basically the first person that really got into the wrath of him was Santos. He would just go after him, and basically he would record everything. And as we talked about, like all these idiots record everything like they're just some sort of like, I'm recording this for posterity or whatever. Like you're not. And I know they think that, well, I'm just showing it because I want people to understand. But like he recorded it like him just Santos had to make like a list of things he damaged. And part of this thing was he would say, I don't remember doing that. And it was, how did he phrase it? It was like, it's not that you don't remember.
It's that you don't want to, or something like
Yeah, something to that effect, where basically it's like, you just don't want to remember. You don't want to own up. You're not accountable. You're not being accountable.
What's really interesting about that is you would expect this to work backward from how it worked, but he had introduced the idea of repressed memories to them in these private help sessions where he convinced them that all these horrible things happened to them as children. And then now they believe in repressed memories. He can say, no, you really did do that. Now we just have to work on you to make you remember. And it was so like, I guess you expect things to escalate, like you start with something little and get to something big, but he started with the big thing because that's what made them, well, I can't go home. Well, I can't talk to my mom about what's going on,
Yeah. And to the point with Santos is like the property thing was kind of like that felt like kind of like this is kind of the inroad that at least a documentary. I mean, it seemed like how we're going to kind of extort money out of these kids because that's what he was doing, was extorting a shit ton of money out of these kids and their parents. And Santos had to make a list of the things that he quote unquote damaged, and they were living, these 6 people, and this is at this point, this is in the apartment, which the apartment we got to talk about because that's a whole fucking weird thing that I still don't quite understand. But
Yeah.
he had to, and this Larry just kept buying shit and putting it like woodworking tools, like giant jigsaws, and like there are these 6 people living in a 1-bedroom apartment. He's just filling it like they had no room to move. But when Santos made this list, it was something like he owed him quote unquote $47,000 to fix everything or replace things. And so Santos comes from this, like you said, this poor immigrant family. They had no money. Like his father, like traveled to Mexico to get money from people to help his son, and just like this was the grift part of it. This
And they
is the
don't
grift.
understand. They're not there. They're not seeing this happen. They don't understand that he didn't really do it.
Mm-hmm.
And like they're like, oh my gosh, he damaged this person's property, and lucky for our son, this person's willing to let him pay for it instead of calling the cops or whatever, because they're not there. They don't know that he's being kept up all night and screamed at until he confesses that he scratched something or knocked something down or used a pan wrong, was one of them. Like, yeah. I mean, when you talk about the things that he was putting on the list, the fact that it gets to $47,000 is actually kind of amazing, because it wasn't like you knocked over the jigsaw in the middle of the living room. It was just this collection of little things. And I think maybe that was part. I believe that I don't believe he believed anything he told these people.
I think it was just a means to push them to see how far he could
Yeah.
push them.
And so I think it was 100% like, I'm going to get this kid to pay me a shitload of money. And if I, accuse him of making a power tool not work anymore, well, you can prove that it does. But if I say you scratched my Califon pans, then, that's really, that's a couple $100. And then it adds up over time.
Yeah. And this leads into the other stuff later where it's like it gets way worse with the money he's trying to expect from these people, and the demands just get heavier and heavier. But like I said, the documentary made it seem like this was kind of Santos was the first real one to kind of get all this shit thrown at him. So yeah, it's very unsettling to watch him just, and he's all this is recorded, like it's just him debasing him, and just like, what'd you do wrong? You need to be accountable. Yeah. And he just like at them. And because they're sleep deprived and on fucking, Adderall and like not eating, like he had locks on the fridge. Like these kids were just fucking depleted. So like, of course they're going to say anything to try to make the bad shit stop. I mean, that's just how abused people who are abused act. They want to fucking
Make it
stop,
stop. Oh,
make
and
it stop.
he had the kid's tongue in a set of pliers.
Oh, that was Dan. That's the part
Yeah,
that just like he like made him here, give me your tongue, and took a fucking pliers and was holding on, and they're recording this, and he's hitting him with a hammer at the same time.
yeah.
Like there's a lot of hard shit, and I don't know why that bit was like. I was like,
I think
fuck.
it's so. I mean, it's very visceral, but also it's so random. If I said I'm going to beat somebody until they tell me the truth, I wouldn't go for a pair of pliers and, drag them around by their tongue. You would think like hitting them, whatever, the stuff you see in movies, burning them, whatever. I don't
Yeah,
know. But like that, it's such a weird place to go. And what again is really kind of upsetting is you watch this and you see what they show, and the documentarian said basically they had a really hard time deciding what to include and what not to because every video was so much worse than the one they had seen before, and they wanted to find a space to show how bad it was, but not show you. He had videos, and this wasn't in the documentary either, but he had videos of all of the girls having sex with him and strangers. And
hmm,
he said, basically, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to send these to your parents. I'm going to send these to your family.
like Collateral and Nexium is what that bit reminded me of.
Yeah, and I think that part of the videotaped confessions is I think he wanted them to believe like I have you on tape saying this. So if you screw me over, I'm going to turn this tape over to the cops or I'm going to turn this tape over to the college and they're going to see that you stole money from me, you tried to poison me, you trashed my house, whatever it is that he got them to admit to.
Yeah, I mean, so all right, so we're at our apartment, but and let's just talk about the apartment for a minute because when they first went to this apartment, I was like, how the fuck is this guy affording an apartment in
Yes.
New York City? I'm like, this is New York City. This isn't like some podunk fucking town. Like it's fucking super expensive to live in New York City. And then we learned there's this guy that was kind of the owner of the apartment, and his name was hold on,
Lee
it was
Chen, I think,
Lee
right?
Chen. And
Yeah.
this guy's like, somehow he came into Larry's orbit when he was in prison because he was in prison. But yeah, it's a lot, but there's a lot going on with that bit. But I don't. They never explain how he comes into his orbit. They never explain like Larry says, "Oh well," he asked if he could just stay at my apartment for a few days, and then he just basically took over the old apartment, and it's just easier for me to not be there and not deal with them. And I'm like, "You're renting an apartment in New York City." Like what? That's
I
super
feel like
expensive. How is that a sunk cost?
there's a couple things that I wonder about here. One, I mean, how much money do you have to be like, well, I'll just move out until he gets tired of living here? Um, that's a lot of money.
I don't have that kind of money. That's for fucking sure.
But two, I wonder, and because we don't get this guy's story, we don't know anything about him.
Oh,
He's in and out of the documentary.
yep.
Um, I wonder if there was some kind of weird manipulation thing going on there. And he's not good, maybe doesn't want to admit to it in the documentary.
Yeah, I that makes a lot of sense. It's still though, like he just like, yeah, I would go in there and there'd be 6 kids living there. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's your fucking apartment. Like, you could call the police and don't get that guy out of there. Like, I just couldn't. It had to be some sort of manipulation towards something he had on him, because that just, I can't fathom just being like, well, fuck that, and I'll just walk away and let him be there. I don't know.
I know in California, if somebody stays in your house for longer than 30 days or has mail sent to your house, no matter how long they've lived there, you have to evict them. You can't just kick them out. But even if that's the case in New York, and I don't know if it is, they were there for a really long time.
5 years. It was
This guy
5 years there.
totally had time to evict them if that were the case.
Yeah, I'm just baffled by that bit. So that's not really a major part of the story. It is just such a big hole in it that it actually threw me out of the thing for a minute, because I was trying to figure out, like, how's this guy involved with this freaking narcissistic loon? Like, and he just takes over his apartment. Like,
Yeah. Well, I think it is a big part of the story because I think that the the kids thought that it was his.
oh, I'm sure they did.
Yeah. And so, oh, well, all these things he's saying about himself must be true because who gets out of prison after 5 years and has enough money for this?
Yeah, he didn't. That's the
It was
thing. He
their
didn't.
money and he wasn't paying rent. Yeah. It's like, yeah. Cause I know my husband was like coming in and out. He didn't watch the whole thing. And he was like, how does he afford all of this? And it's like, oh, well, that's the point of the college students.
Yeah, because he
They
can.
afford everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so that, sorry for that tangent, but that still bothers the shit out of me, because I can't figure out why that occurred. But I think your theory makes the most sense, that he was manipulating him
I
too,
mean,
and he
yeah,
just,
it's just like, I don't know. It's very, I can understand not wanting to admit to that. And it's kind of like the only explanation I can think of. It's so like, I don't know.
well,
I wouldn't let that happen in my house. I would be on that. I'd be like, you need to get out. And if you're not, then maybe I find a probation violation. Like there's got to be one.
there has to be, like, and the thing is, as someone who has been on probation and parole, one of the requirements is usually you have to have a job, and he very clearly did not.
Not, yeah.
So, um, all right, in the apartment you talked about Dan with the pliers. I think Dan is the first one that gets out.
He is. But
And yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump on anything.
before he gets out, I want to talk a little bit more about Dan. But so remember, this is a cult. It's not just a weird guy.
Mhm.
And it's so unoriginal. The Quest for Potential, is that what it was called?
Yes, it was the most cliche title. Like, when he started, he just gave him this fucking the quest for potential, and I'm like, are we at a bad corporate meeting in, like, Boca
Yeah.
Raton? Like, what is going on
What
here?
is going on? And that started at the dorms. That started before they moved, the Quest for Potential thing. And then he
Yeah, that
gets to
started
the
in the.
apartment. He literally calls what they're doing boot camp, which now I realize he doesn't have any idea in the world what boot camp is like. 19 days in the Air Force, he didn't even graduate Air Force boot camp. And they have the shortest boot camp, and he still wasn't in long enough to graduate boot camp. Um, but the point of boot camp is to break you down.
Mhm.
Like in Marine Corps boot camp, they give you like a completely different language almost. Nothing is what it's called in the outside world. So like your pen is an ink stick. Your shoes, depending on where you go to boot camp, are like tinny runners or go fasters. Like everything has a weird name. And part of the reason is to like kind of break you from reality because what they're trying to do is approximate the fog of war. And also, you trauma bond with your platoon mates and, work together, whatever. And you're very fucking loyal at the end of it. And so I thought that was really interesting that he was calling it boot camp and then putting him through these physical exercises and all of this stuff. And yeah, so I don't know how to get from that to the next thing I want to talk about. In the midst of all this boot camp stuff, everybody's finding out what horrible people their parents really are. Um, Santos's father cheats on his mom all the time. Okay, like it's just like an idea that came up. Again, it's very Teal Swan. It's like he's just sitting there thinking of things like.
Mhm.
And later we see Felicia showing pictures of her childhood, and she's trying to figure out what's real and what Larry put in her head. And
Mhm.
it's like, oh, I remember being really sad because, and she starts telling the story of this, her father ignoring her or whatever. And then she's like, wait, no, like, no, I'm looking at the picture. I don't look sad. Like, so there's all this going on, and he's doing these marathon sessions with Isabel still. He really zeroed in on her.
Mhm.
And then Dan decides that he really wants to learn how to be a man from Larry. And it starts with really little stuff, like the example you were mentioning before we started recording with this is the right way to have coffee. And it's just like, it's just coffee with creamer. Like,
And coffee with half and half was what he mentioned, and I was
secret.
like, "Really? That's the proper way? Like, how about have coffee whatever fucking way you want?" But whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just like these. It's all these little things. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but then he starts, I guess, preying on Dan's insecurities as a young man. And
Around the
this,
sexuality. Yeah.
yeah, and this leads to threesomes with him and Larry and Isabella, which that is kind of where my brain started to break. And I started to feel like I wasn't going to be able to keep taking notes because I was just like spiraling all the time because it's so weird. And he's talking about it, and it's like, God, it sounds like a Pornhub setup, right? It's like, fucking. So he would touch her, and then he would ask me to touch her the way that he touched her. And then, like, he's teaching me. But then it turns into full on threesomes with Gregorian chants.
That was my favorite bit.
And this is not okay. This isn't that like 5 minutes in the 90s where people were really into Gregorian chants. This was in the aughts or the
No, that's
later.
yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's
Some kind of I think
is that the music you put on for sexy times? Because that is not what I put on for sexy times.
no.
Like, ugh.
God,
Having a whole bunch of people like that would be distracting. So no, thank you. I said I messaged you when I was watching. I was like Gregorian chants, and you're
I
like,
know. And it's like, because it is. It's like, what? Because the premise, the thing that's happening is already so freaking weird.
yeah, it's
Then
weird
they
enough.
throw that in, and you're just like, what fucking planet are we on? What in the hell is happening? And it's not, I mean, we do that, like, I do this on every episode. It's not funny because, like, the things
No.
that are happening really terrible, but like that detail is so absurd and it's true.
Yeah, and it seems like something like if you said, "Let's put them that they were doing it to Gregorian chants," and you put that in like a TV show,
Oh,
and they'd
yeah.
be like, "Fucking no, nobody's gonna. That's gonna be too ridiculous. We're not gonna do
And
that."
you and I write fiction. We know people would say, no one's
Yeah.
going to believe that, or that's too weird. It's going to take people out of the story.
Yep,
Pick something
and no,
else.
and it did. Like that.
It did.
Fair enough. That one definitely did. I was like, "What is that?" Like, choose better music. Like seriously, there's a million options, and that's not a good one.
It's so, yeah.
Hmm. So if you want to stick with Dan, like Dan actually, I think for a bit becomes the punching bag over Santos. I think is kind of how it's done in a doc. At least that's how I took it. Like, seemed
Yeah.
like Dan was kind of getting the brunt of everything,
Well, because
and
Santos broke up with Talia, so he was no longer the, I don't know, the least favorite.
yeah. But we get kind of a. This is where we get into suicidal ideation a bit, and so trigger warning for that. But Dan has a night where he's at the apartment and he's by himself. So he just wanders up to the roof and he's not in a great mental state, obviously. And he says that, is if I remember correctly, he just goes downstairs and packs a couple things and leaves.
Yeah, just walks away, which I think, as poetic as that sounds and as interesting, like as moving as it is to see in a movie, it's terrifying to think about in real life. That
Yeah,
this,
I mean that took a lot of courage because he was in the middle of all of it and like the main focus of Larry's ire, and like he was just like, I'm gonna walk off, and he could have very easily jumped off the roof. Like seriously, he was there, and he just decided, nope, I'm gonna leave.
and just to put these decisions into perspective as well, like eventually almost everyone leaves and none of them feel like they can go back to their families.
Because he's filled their head with all these things where they think their families have done awful shit to them. And time again, we see these families like, I just want my kids back. Like,
And Dan admits that he told his dad, you abused me, you did this, you did that. So even if that night he walked away, he no longer believed those things, which we see later. It takes time for
mhm.
them as adults to undo that damage. But even if he did, he's got that in the back of his mind. Why called my dad up and called him a rapist? Like probably not going to go home that night. So he's, and I don't remember what city Dan is from, but it's not New York City.
No.
So he's walking off into New York City alone with nowhere to go, no money because they weren't holding on to any money that came in. I mean, that is just, and I feel confident in saying, even though we don't know exactly when he left in that 5 years that they were in that apartment, he probably was still very much in, like, I feel like they all have some form of arrested development where they kind of emotionally and logic wise are like where they were when he started to in on them, because they were not developing in a normal environment. They were being drugged, they were being abused, they were being deprived of sleep. So to me, it's a lot like a 19-year-old kid walking off into New York City with no money and nowhere to go.
Yeah. Now we do know that Dan did go back to school because he said because he went back on campus and he just avoided the other kids that were part of the thing. So he was still in school. So this is still within at least within 4 years of that stuff starting.
Right.
So we know that bit for him, and that's the only reason. Like I said, you as you said, they don't do a good job of laying out timelines in here, but that's the only reason I remember that is like he's like, I just wouldn't even look at the other, like all the other people that were still there with him. I just wouldn't even look at him.
Yeah.
And so
And
he managed to finish up. So that's good. But man,
there also was an element of people who had lived in the dorm or were friends of people who lived in the dorm who all knew the people that left with Larry, that were like, oh, like I'm really worried about my friends.
mhm.
Something's not right. And, what do we do? Because like Claudia was like best friends with one of the people who was like, fuck that guy from day one.
It was Raven. Yeah.
Yeah. And she basically was like, something's wrong. This is not who Claudia is. And that was like the extent of the accusations she made. But then Claudia writes this letter that refutes all these claims like one by one. It's
To
like,
the
well,
dean.
yeah, to the dean of the college. It's like, well, Raven didn't say any of that because she's present in the documentary. She's sharing her perspective. We know she didn't make those accusations. It was like, my opinion is I think that he knew that a grown adult hearing that would start putting the pieces together.
Hmm.
And so he wanted to get ahead of it. But in the way that people like this are like really skilled at manipulation in close quarters, they're kind of dumb about how the real world works.
Yeah.
Because if you get a letter that's like, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, you're like, I don't know, man. It seems like maybe you did because nobody asked.
Yeah. Methinks thou dost protest too much.
Right. And it's so obvious, like, why would this girl just write this letter? It's obvious that it came from him. I
Yeah.
don't think that I needed to hear that I needed to know that her friends said it didn't seem like her, because it's like, well, no shit, it was him, you know?
Yeah. And that letter is like, this is how he worked on the kids. He made them say that I am the problem. I'm the one that did say I'm the one that made all the errors. Larry's a great guy, a mentor. He's done nothing wrong. Like he made every one of them. I mean, it's normal for cults to have their leader put them on a pedestal and all that jazz. We're used to seeing that, but just the way he would make them just fucking dehumanize themselves in any sort of communication. I mean, it happens later with a website thing, which we'll get into.
Yeah, I don't want to get into Claudia's story yet.
No, but there's part of it in that too. And Claudia was the one that wrote the thing to the dean, I
Yes.
thought.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's his constant breakdown of these kids to make them see that he's doing all he can. He's just trying to help them. He's trying to help them achieve, and it's just the way he operates, so that all these, and I say kids because they were young and they were not, as you said, at a little bit of arrested development because they were getting the shit abused out of them in so many ways. So
One
yeah,
thing
it's rough.
that I think is important to understand too is like development wise, Western teenagers have like certain things that are going on that are pretty much universal in the Western world.
Mm-hmm.
They're like certain brain development isn't on the same track. So like social desires outpace like emotional maturity and stuff like that, right? One of those things is that the vast majority of teenagers, a normal part of their development is the imaginary audience, which means like everybody is looking at me. Everybody's watching what I do. Everybody knows that I'm awkward. Everybody knows that I tripped in the bathroom, even though no one was in the bathroom. Like this idea that everyone is looking at them and everyone is judging them. And I think at 19, that's still going on, 18, 19, that's still going on. And I think that really plays a big role in his ability to get in and be like, I'm going to teach you how to be a grown up. I'm going to teach you how to be cool like me. And you're the problem.
Mm-hmm.
All those insecurities you feel are they're real. They're true. I'm awesome. Quit fucking up and you can be awesome like me. Like, I feel like that is a big part of it.
Yeah, for certain. And that's just, he does this with all of them. That it's not just one. And we'll see, like, as we get into some other folks that come into the fold, just how much he can break people down. Like he breaks a lot of people down. But yeah. And do we want to get into Felicia's story yet, or do you want
Yeah,
to?
well, I was going to say, like, we started talking about Santos, and I think it's worth getting into because this was the most harrowing part for me.
It's
So Santos has a sister that's local named Yalitza. I think I'm saying that right. And she moves in. And she is subjected.
early on,
Yeah, pretty early
like
on.
when they're in college. Yeah.
Um, and he gets his hooks in her. And then their sister, who is just finished up medical school and is in her residency for psychiatry in Los Angeles, comes to visit. And I feel like there's a lot of stuff that happens in this really tiny visit. He
Mm-hmm.
pretty much, oh, here's a great opportunity to knock Isabella down a peg because she thought of herself like his partner. And then here comes this other girl, and I want to have sex with her. So what makes you think you're my girlfriend?
Yeah.
And Felicia says it was love at first sight. I mean, I think that was probably, that's a story that maybe she convinced herself of later.
Yeah.
But she goes back and they stay in contact because it just took that long, just a weekend, for him to kind of get in her head. And I don't know, like, if you don't know a lot about medical school or about residencies, like, I think it's easy to think like she had a day job and this was going on. But the reality is like you work like 16 to 24-hour shifts. It's like, I mean, a lot of people consider medical residencies human rights abuses. They're that intense. You don't get sleep. You don't get proper nutrition. you're a zombie. What did she have to do every free moment she had? Well, she had to be on the phone with Larry.
Hmm.
So she was getting no, like, when we say no sleep, like, if she fell asleep standing up and jerked awake before she hit the floor, that's the amount of sleep she got that day.
Yep.
And so it's not long before he's got her, I mean, absolutely crazed. That was the hardest thing for me to watch. She is full on panic attack, blubbering, screaming, terrified because he's convinced her that her parents abused her, her parents used, trafficked her parents did this, her parents did that, and her parents are associates of this guy that's got it out for him. And by the way, we skipped over that, the Carrick thing.
Yeah, the Carrick thing is important.
So in real life, he really helped get the chief of police put in prison, and this is a guy named last name Carrick. That
Mhm.
really happened. In fantasy world, that's why everything bad in his entire life after that moment happened. And he is at this point where Felicia enters the picture. Carrick was trying to poison me. And one of the things he's getting Yalitza and Santos and Isabella and Claudia to go in on is that Carrick is out to get him. And he would get them to confess that actually they had spoken to Carrick. Well, I was sent here by Carrick to spy on you, but I changed my mind, so I didn't tell him anything, like all this stuff. He convinces Felicia that her parents are in on it with Carrick. Sorry, I'm getting it out of order because it's so wild, it's hard. So first he convinces her that because he loves her, the people who are after him are after her now. And she's just not safe. She's just not safe. And she drops her residency, moves to New York in a panic that her life's in danger. We find out later that when that happened, he burnt up her school records and actually convinced her that in doing that, she couldn't go back, which is not how it works. It's not 1942. Like,
yeah, there's more records than just the paper shit you have. So yeah,
she didn't know. I mean, I don't want to make fun of her. I'm more making fun of him because I do. If you watch this documentary, you see how broken she was. It is so hard to watch. Then he convinces her that her parents were in on it with Carrick, that they have known Carrick her whole life, and that they were poisoning her too. And somewhere in there, I mean, she's just a mess. Like, they're showing videos. She's having full on psychotic episodes.
mm-hmm.
And his response to that is to physically kind of try to calm her down, but he's tossing her around. He's like, I mean, very physically violent, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
If she's crying and screaming and crying and he wants her to stop, then he's got Santos involved in that with probably one of the hardest scenes to watch. Santos says, every time you cry, I'm going to hit myself. And of course, she's in a complete panic attack. So she's screaming and crying, and he is just beating the shit out of himself. And Larry is basically working to convince Santos that it's his sister's fault that he's hitting himself. His sister's doing this to him.
Yeah, and Santos kept saying to her, "Is this how much you love me?" Like, just
yeah.
It is really fucking difficult to watch that sort of, like I said, it just the way he just breaks these folks down. And Felicia is a Harvard educated, Columbia educated doctor going, and he takes someone who, and this is one of those instances where you go, this person's really smart. And this guy, whatever gift he has in manipulation, it's exceptional and in a really fucking bad way.
I think because we have that record from the custody hearing, and they said he is able to manipulate any situation he finds himself in. So we know he has like a talent for it. But then in addition to that, he has a specific set of knowledge, which is like, oh, she's a resident, a new doctor in residency. So she's already not getting any sleep. Well, like she talks about it, right? They'd be on the phone and she'd be like, I have to go, I'm tired. And he would like pick a fight right at that moment. Not about being tired and wanting to get off the phone, about something else. And then, oh, I got to stay on the phone because I have to convince him that that's not true. And then they'd be up all night. So yeah, I mean, it's very calculated. A lot of
Mhm.
times we see these and it's like, well, how much does this cult leader believe and how much did they just like start improving when they needed to maintain control? I think no, I don't think he's delusional and I don't think that he's any of this happened by accident. I think it was calculated and evil, for lack of a better word.
I think evil's an excellent word for it because if you these videos you see her and she is just like having like you could say some people would call it a fit, but it's a psychotic episode. Like she is just losing her shit, and because this guy has just fucked her brain up so much that like she can't think in a cognitive like logical line at all.
And she's on drugs because he's drugging them.
Mhm. Yep, and he's having sex with her and Isabella still, and just like
And she describes like their sleeping arrangements.
yeah,
She's the girlfriend and Isabella isn't, but Isabella sleeps they all sleep naked in the same bed and Isabella sleeps with her hands on his genitals and
yeah, and then
I want her to, it's because she's more comfortable that way. Like really weird, like under normal circumstances in a normal relationship where all of this like abusive stuff hadn't happened, that's the guy who'd literally be getting hit with a frying pan for that lame of an excuse, right? Like, but there's so much manipulation that it's like, what is she going to do? Run back to her parents that she now believes have poisoned her?
Mhm.
Go back to LA where she's no longer in residency to become a psychiatrist? Like, no, she's going to lay there and be like, okay, I guess this is how we sleep.
And he just convinced them that there's no other outcome. None. It's just this is it. This is your life. I am your life. And yeah, and it's if we talk about how he would manipulate them and basically pull all their money.
Yeah.
And the other part of this is the families involved. When we read about the trial and everything that comes later, is like apparently he was able to manipulate $1 million out of several of these families, $1 million out of each of them. And I just like it's really kind of just astounding to think that that guy could pull that off. And the problem is if you look at our society, kind of tends to look at looks as kind of the harbinger of how much you can get away with. This guy was just a regular looking guy, and just but his manipulation skills were so good that he could pull this kind of stuff and get away with it.
He didn't have money. He didn't have power. He didn't have looks. It was all cult of personality, powerful manipulation. And that is interesting, like you said, because we usually think like, oh, people with power will are more likely to do these things, or people with money, whatever, because it's an entry into that kind of control. But he didn't have any of it. So to continue with this, Santos's family, the Rosarios, then he gets Yalitza to confess that she's been poisoning them. Oh no, and prior to that, maybe Claudia has been poisoning them.
Yeah, like I said, the poisoning, which is why I picked the drink I did, is like the recurrent theme here, and it's always Carrick and it's always poisoning, and those are the two focuses. And he always records them like, "What do you want to say now?" And just like very, tell me what you did wrong, and account for it. And like these people just look fucking just a mess because he's been fucking with them so much.
Yeah,
It's like like very clearly just psychologically like shattered. And just they said the Felicia breaking thing, like seeing how broken she was just that was fucking absolutely heartbreaking to watch because like she just like there's one part where she like comes up and stands next to him and he's like, "What are you doing? Get away." And she's like, "No, I feel good right here, Larry. I feel good. I want to be here, right here." And just like talking like almost like a toddler. Like that's how much she was broken down. It's like she was talking in like toddler mode. It was
yeah.
really, really hard to watch.
I think the worst part for me with her, and this, I don't know if you'll feel the same way, but so through the course of this, Santos leaves first, and he does not go home. He doesn't contact his family. He just leaves. Then Yalitza leaves because she's now enemy number one. And so Felicia is the only one of the family left there. Um, in the end, it's Isabella, Felicia, and Larry. Larry gets arrested. The documentarians go to the house, and Felicia is like maniacally laughing through the whole interview. Just super obviously a fake laugh, but like compulsively so.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter what she's saying. She'd be like, yeah, there's like a lock on the fridge to keep people from messing with our food. And
Yeah,
like,
like somebody's coming in their house and messing with their food. Like that's how they thought
yeah,
because
it was
that's
like, oh, I love Larry. And it was so jarring and upsetting. And it clearly wasn't a real genuine laugh, which is part of why it was jarring. But it made me feel like probably like this is like a strategy that she developed to keep him happy. That, I'm talking about the fact that this man I'm calling my husband is in prison and that everybody thinks that, he's abused me and my family poisoned me and I have all these horrible physical symptoms from being poisoned, but I'm laughing through it. I think it's that thing of like, well, if I cry, I get in trouble. If I look sad, I get in trouble. If I say something bothers me, I get in trouble. So, I'm happy, everything's great. And it was really that was more upsetting to me than later when she is away from Isabella and away from the house and she's trying to sort out what was real and what was a product of Larry's intervention because it was so clearly both not real and out of her control. And just yeah, like maniacal. It did not come across as like a person who had any control over their thought processes or their emotions.
yeah, not at all. Uh, and in that same vein, when Isabella's there, she is like almost detached and cold about it.
Mhm.
Like just she's like the opposite, just straight. Nope, just kind of very short answers. Um, Larry is arrested. Yes. We didn't explain how he got what led to his arrest because that's where Claudia comes in. So Claudia, ugh,
This poor
and
girl,
to be clear, she's not part of the documentary, so we don't really know
everything.
everything about her.
Yeah.
But Larry basically turned her to be an escort, and yeah,
Because she owed him money
hmm
for God knows what, right? Because this is
they had
getting
to make repairs. It wasn't reparations; it was repairs, which I thought was a strange terminology to make repairs.
because he's not a smart guy, Doug. I mean, I think he meant reparations, but it's that thing of, like I think we often assume that if someone's very good at manipulation that they're smart. And I've met some people who are really good at manipulation who are dumber than a box of rocks. And I felt like there was some evidence that that was the case with him as well.
It reminds me a bit of I'm going to go back off, but a political version of this.
Mm.
When Trump was running for president,
Okay.
there was a guy in the race named Ben Carson, who was a neurosurgeon. Like, and he was dumb as shit. Like, he didn't know what was going on, and that guy was a neurosurgeon. Like, I could see what you're saying. Like, this person has a skill, and it's a very specific skill, and they're really great at it. But it doesn't mean they're smart in other veins, because, like, yeah, you're right. It makes more sense that way. That Larry just was really great at manipulation. Was like being a savant at manipulation, but not being good at anything else.
But also, if you're that good at manipulation, you don't need to learn anything. Like, like I operate in a world where I have to know how to do stuff. But if I could always make other people do it for me, I could always make other people pay my bills. I could always get whatever I want. Especially if I learned that as a child, I wouldn't have to know anything. I would just have to know how to get people to do what I want. And then I've got money and I've got a place to live and like in Larry's case, he gets laid when he wants to. He gets, his entertainment, because I really believe a lot of the abuse was just solely for his entertainment, which is horrible, but I think it's true.
I think it is too. I think he,
Real
you
disclaimer,
know,
that's my opinion.
mm, no, it's like you got like a charge out of like just fucking these people up. Like
Right.
there was just a kind of a glee in it, I'm sure. And yeah.
It did make me think. So I know, like, if this is somebody's first time tuning in, we're making all these references, and you're probably whatever. But much like the repressed memory thing, and it all leading back to child sexual abuse, reminded me of Teal Swan. The targeting one family and just doing everything he could to ruin each member of that family individually
Mhm.
reminded me a lot of Keith Raniere and the Daniela girl.
Yeah, yeah, just the way that yeah, that's a very apt comparison there because it seems like all these leaders have just at least one of those kind of things where they're just trying to just destroy that person for whatever just to see if they can do it, if it's morbid curiosity, if it's glee, if it's
Yeah.
pleasure, who knows?
I mean, it's hard for me to imagine a like neutral reason to want the whole family involved and then to target them the way that he did.
Yeah, and he went after that Rosario family like with a fucking vengeance, like just it you and I talked about like just how fucking split up that family was because of this guy. And this guy just royally just ruined that whole family. And there was a like when we were watching, I was wondering if that family was going to be able to repair it. Because it was just like just so messed up.
Well, because we hear so at the time of filming, Yalitza, Santos, and Felicia are all participating in the documentary,
Mhm. But not communicating with each other.
but they don't speak to each other. They haven't seen each other. They have not spoken to their parents. They do not speak to their parents. All three. Um, by the end, Felicia, Yalitza, and the parents are starting to communicate.
Yeah, and Santos is communicating with the sisters. So
Yeah.
at least did that.
So it's starting, but yeah, it's like you say, it's like, well, with anything, right? It'll never be what it was. That is not an option no matter how hard you work. It'll never be what it was. Will it be healthy, happy, and comfortable again is the question. And that is really hard to imagine because you have like there's a part where Felicia is saying she's gone, she's out of it. And she's saying she can't contact her parents because she's still terrified of them.
Mhm.
Because those fear responses don't just go away.
No, it takes time to unlearn that shit.
And it honestly, like I don't know the science behind this, but I feel like this is true. It feels true. I think that you could have a trauma response to suggestions like that because they're tied up in real trauma that is happening when the suggestions are being made. It's tied up in these years of abuse and control. And I could see it resulting in I'm triggered by my parents because that was the topic of conversation through all this horrible shit that was happening. I was made to believe that all these horrible things happened. And even though I know that they didn't, there was years of my life that I believed that they did.
Mhm.
Like, it's scary to think about. It's upsetting. I hope they have a happy ending.
Me too.
They deserve a happy ending.
Yeah, especially with all they went through. So yeah, I agree. It's just like we see that they kind of are making amends and trying to figure it out, but who knows how that works out. I just hope they keep at it. But to get back to Claudia, because this is where it starts to kind of really fucking unravel for Larry. I mean, it's been unraveling. Don't get me wrong. This shit's been spiraling for a while. Um,
But
but
not
yeah,
for him.
not for him. No.
Because the people who left just left. They didn't go to the authorities because what would their adults? Like, that's part of it.
Yeah.
It's not illegal to be.
And he also probably made them terrified of the police because Carrick was part of the police. And I'm sure he put that in their head too.
Yeah,
It's like, don't touch the police. They're gonna come after you. Like I'm sure he did a
against
lot of
you.
that shit too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I forget who was the person. There was like, I mean, I think it was Dan that somebody told him about this. What was it was like a website. It was
Yeah, it was her name, Claudia.
ClaudiaDrury.com, and it was like an escort site, but it was also a confessional.
Yeah.
Like, like it is.
Here's the so the documentary talks about how much money she was giving to Larry, and then I found another number um while I was just reading stuff. Both of the numbers are really high. It's just how high, right? So the documentary says something like 1.5 million, and the other source I saw said 2.5 million. I don't know what kind of clientele. I mean, I have an idea what kind of clientele you have to make that much money as an escort. I am having a really hard time thinking about what kind of clientele has that kind of money and also sees that weird ass website and doesn't think, oh no, thank you. I'm certain I can find someone else who would charge me $1,500 for an hour of their time, you know?
Yeah, but you also are dismissing the depravity of a lot of people that might think that oh, that's kind of hot because it's really weird. Like,
Yeah, but I just feel like people who have, well, for keep come back to it, Donald Trump, um, people who have a lot of money and influence really don't want anybody to know what they get up to in especially when it involves sex work, which in New York is illegal. So it's just that weird thing of like, what is the risk assessment that happens when you see that and you decide, it'll be worth it. I don't know, but I also feel like probably you hit a certain point, it's and people aren't going to your website; they're word of mouth, right?
yeah, I I made a comment in my notes that like in that there's a video where he's recording her on this website where basically she's confessing that she poisoned all these people and like she just and she looks to me just looks either exhausted or drugged out of her mind or both. Like
Okay.
she just looks haggard. I mean, that's a and listen, people look the way they look, but like this girl's been through it, and this guy is basically forcing her to sell her body to pay him back for something, whatever the fuck he put in her head.
Yeah.
But the thing is this website is actually what kind of starts pushing the FBI in his direction. This is actually his dumbass thing pushes the FBI towards him.
Because he's dumb. Like he is so dumb. I can't like I know that life isn't fair and we don't live in a meritocracy, but it's just like how can someone that fucking stupid be that fucking successful at what they're doing for so long, right?
Well, we're not just talking about Trump, then we're talking about people like Elon Musk. Like
Well,
it just
in this case, it's emeralds. Emeralds is what.
emerald is a good way to accumulate money and then just
Yeah.
you know. But at any
Yeah.
rate, yeah, it's that bit is actually kind of just the part, and I no, was it Dan? It was the other guy, and I want to say his name was Nathan,
Yeah, it was one. It was just one of the people that lived in the original dorm.
but left very early because the guy was like, he's like, this is too fucking weird for me, and he just
Yeah,
kind of scooted out.
I think it was the same guy who said, before this happened with the website, every once in a while they'd be like, yeah, like we'd be talking and be like, oh, remember when a bunch of our friends joined a cult?
Yeah, and yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of notes into how that goes, but they did actually videotape the FBI raid, which I thought was, I was just like, okay.
Yeah.
Like not the FBI, the FBI, not the FBI. To be clear, this was like the people in the house. It was
Yes.
at
Yeah.
this point. At this point, it was just Larry, Isabella, and Felicia were the only people in that house. And
Right.
they said that they moved into a place that was their friend's place. And I'm like, who are these friends? Like they were
Well,
isolated. Like
because also the house, we skipped this part. He moves them to New Jersey
Piscataway.
and has them doing like heavy machinery landscaping work,
Yep.
but it's always wrong. So they always have to do it over again. And so
And they're doing it like the middle of the night
middle of the
because he's
night,
so cranked up on Adderall. Like they're cutting down trees in the middle of the night. Like I was like, you don't ever like Jesus Christ. Like I am not a lumberjack, but I know you don't do anything like that. Like
here's the thing
holy
about
shit.
Adderall, if you don't need it or you take too much. It's meth. It's just that's what it is. It's meth. And yeah, so I mean, not literally, but almost literally, like chemically, it's not a good thing to take if you don't need it. It's definitely not a good thing to take a whole lot of. And he was taking more than he was giving them.
I think it was like 120 milligrams. Like I forget the measurement. It was 120 of whatever the measurement was, which was like you said. I have no idea about how much is an adequate dose of Adderall, but that sounded like quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know either. I don't take it. Like, I'm sure it's different depending on why you're taking it and how serious like your symptoms are or whatever. Because I think it's prescribed for stuff other than ADD as well. I'm not sure, but it's an amphetamine. It is a really fucking powerful one, and he was taking tons of it, and he was giving them Adderall to keep them up, to keep them focused, but to keep them awake.
Yeah. So
Dig up,
according
fill it in, dig it up, fill it in, like just
Yeah, it is the recommended daily dose is between 5 milligrams and 40 milligrams, and he was taking 120 milligrams a day.
Jesus Christ.
So he was taking what four times, like nearly four times the amount.
4 times the maximum.
Three times the amount, three times at the max. And it's an extended release drug. So like you take it and it just. But he would like Santos said, he would just crush them all up and just take them all at once in the
Yeah,
morning and just
he was
ride
speeding.
that shit all day.
I mean, so like I'm taking pharmacology classes right now, so that's where this is coming from. But there's ways to make drugs hit your system faster and to like not override the extended release, but like manipulate it. So like the pill, part of extended release is that the pill doesn't dissolve as quickly. So like if you wanted a immediate but short effect, you would crush it up and snort it. But like crushing it up and eating it would get you like an immediate effect, but also it would last because it's like it's got to go through your digestive
Through your system.
process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I feel like it's like the worst of both worlds if you're abusing Adderall is to crush it up and eat it. Because if he snorted it, he wouldn't be high that long, you know.
No.
Like anyway,
Yeah.
or he'd be taking a lot more because he'd want to be high all the time. I guess is probably the more likely answer.
Yeah. That whole like, here we're gonna make you do manual labor shit. It was just like, and they were doing it like in the rain. Like and he would just fucking shit on everything they were doing and just make them feel like idiots. And like that was part of the training bit. But like at the same time, it's like like eh, so they I don't know how long they were in that place in New Jersey, but like they had the whole backyard fucking torn up. And like when we went there and Felicia's like, oh, we're gonna build this and we're gonna build this. I'm like, you're gonna build nothing. Like
Yeah, well, because that was one of the other things she would laugh about in that really weird way. It's like, well, when we do it wrong, we would have to do it again. And it's like, no, that was
Larry would just tear it all down and make us do it all again from the beginning. Like
no, he made them tear it down. He didn't lift a finger.
unless it was with the machinery, he would get in the
Oh, yeah,
machinery and do stuff.
of
Yeah.
course, that's fun. I mean, I think it looks fun, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah. But so, and the other thing with Claudia that's really upsetting is I think that as is the way with a lot of these high control relationships, whether it's a cult or a boyfriend or a boss or whatever, um, she got away and she was giving him all this money, and then um, I think she stopped giving a shit
Mhm.
because at some point she stopped paying him, and he went and demanded payment, and that's
And
part of
took Isabella with him to do it.
yeah.
And according to court documents, this was not relayed in the documentary, as I recall. They said that in the court document that they tied her to a chair and put a plastic bag over her head to start strangling her before she agreed to give money.
Yeah.
Like I said, that was not explicit in the documentary, but that was in the court documents, which is let's just say that's a bit more of a reliable source.
And I think there was an element to like the documentarians were making choices about what to include of Claudia's story since she wasn't there to speak for herself.
That's fair. That's fair.
Coming
Yeah.
from the perspective of these people affected by Larry Ray to tell their story, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and it's they in the documentaries like they went and they assaulted her, and the court documents lay it out, and it's horrific. It's terrible. And that's they got her to agree to another $500,000. Now they videotaped it. They videotaped everything. Isabella ended that documentary knowing that she was probably going to jail, and she still insisted it never happened, even though it was recorded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the end of the documentary, they said Isabella stopped talking to them, and there's a bit with Isabella like we haven't really touched on her too much, but like as soon as like when Larry got arrested, she was just completely in on this is bullshit. This is not true. This is false arrest. And this is the thing that he filled them with from the beginning is like, I was arrested in prison falsely. Like Talia was the one who kind of pushed it. Yeah, just said, this is not true. My dad was falsely in prison because it was a vendetta against him. And he kept using that thing. And do you think that he genuinely thought there was vendettas against him, or do you think he used that as a tool to manipulate the shit out of these kids?
That's the one thing I'm not clear on. I think that knowing what we know about him, he probably thought that every negative thing that ever happened to him was the greatest injustice in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think it is unjust that you had a custody battle and you lost custody of your kids, and it's unjust that you went to by the way, did we even cover what he went to prison for? No, we didn't.
No, let him have it.
He was involved in organized crime in this like extortion scheme, maybe I can't remember now. Okay, and he I think got it in his head that they were going to get caught, so he went to the FBI as an informant with the intention of covering up his involvement in it, and then of course they investigated and they figured it out.
Yeah. Also, the organized crime was like part of it was Russian related, which kind of explains a bit of the Gorbachev connection. I kind of thought like in some way, but yeah, he thought he could cover his own tracks by being an informant. So
I mean, to me, it's just the dumbest thing. Is it's the same thing as the letter, right? It's like, well, I definitely wasn't involved in this extortion scheme. I happen to know everything about.
Now, to be fair, part of his stuff actually got that Carrot guy arrested and thrown in prison for 3 years, and he was up for the director of Homeland Security job and had to withdraw because of this. So
this is the other thing we found out in our outside research. That really happened, and there's another guy involved named DeTomaso, I think, and Larry went after that guy next, and somewhere in that guy beat him nearly to death and caused neurological damage. And they don't say what neurological damage, so it's like, I don't know, maybe he wasn't crazy before that. Or maybe he doesn't have feeling in his fingers, because both of those could be neurological damage.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like,
yeah, who knows? But yeah, he went to jail, and then actually no, he got probation for that. He went to jail for a probation violation.
Right. I can't remember what it was now.
Who fucking knows?
It might have been the kidnapping.
That I think might have been the exacerbating circumstance. Yeah, maybe. The thing is, it's like
there's just too much crazy. I can't remember it all. I got my notes in front of me, and I'm like, I don't know, it's not there. There's 2 pages of notes, and that's not there.
Yeah. And I just didn't. The problem is there's a million things, and on the like I tend to take notes in like an episode form because it's easier for me to kind of connect the episodes.
Mhm.
And the last episode, there's a lot of me talking about emotion with it because, like, seeing there's a bit where Felicia calls her mom, and that made me fucking cry because she was like, she actually earlier had seen her parents walk into their house from her car and couldn't talk to them. Like, that shit really fucking was like really. Hmm. So it's not really the problem is what we're talking about is cult stuff. So it's not really germane to the cult stuff. So I feel kind
It
of dumb
is,
that I took all these notes, but
but I think it is because the real story with cults is not the money that people lose or the time that, well, no, the time, but like not specifically the time. It is what it does to every relationship they have outside of the cult, what it does to their lives because, we'll probably do Heaven's Gate one day, but when I finally did a deep dive on Heaven's Gate, I came to the conclusion, it's my opinion, that most of them didn't believe in it anymore, but they killed themselves because they didn't have any other option. And so I think the emotional stuff is the big story because one, the emotional stuff is what gets the power in the first place, but also it is what keeps people there. And it is the thing that is the hardest to get back if you leave.
yeah, that's true because you're emotionally stunted while you're in those because the only emotion you're allowed to have is regret and fear, not actually allowed to have a full range of emotions, you know?
Yeah, and in reality, like, so there's another scene where she goes to her sister Yalitza's apartment, and you just hear her saying, I don't think it's a good idea for us to speak right now. Over and over and over again, like a rehearsed statement. And she's like, I understand, but she's very emotional because it sucks. And we don't really ever know if that's because of legal stuff or
Yeah.
family stuff or both. We just don't know. But the thing that is upsetting, and I think this is upsetting in Isabella's case as well, but for on a different level, is in your interpersonal relationships, it just doesn't matter if you were brainwashed and under the control of someone else when you do something terrible to someone you care about. To that person, you did it to them.
Hmm.
That's the end of the story to that person. And so you have, Santos, Yalitza, and Felicia were doing these things to each other while this other thing was being done to them. And maybe the only upside for them is that all three of them understand the level of control because they were all three under it.
Hmm.
But repairing those relationships means being able to separate where you were the victim and where you were the asshole.
Yeah.
And you can't repair unless you can do both. And I don't think that in a situation like that that's easy because they were all three victims. They were all three brutally abused. They were all three genuinely not in control of their actions. Like to me, I'll say like, oh well, I don't really care that you were drunk when you did it because you weren't under mind control. Or I don't really care that your boyfriend's an asshole. He doesn't control your mind. But in this case, they were under mind control.
Yep.
So it's pretty complicated.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I don't know how you recover from that either. Like you should, like you think it logically you go, well, I know I was under this high control environment and this shit was going on. And you want to think that, oh, well, we can just, all right, we understand it. So let's work towards the thing. But sometimes just with the fear, especially when you're fearing your own siblings and your parents, like, all right, I'm going to talk a little bit out of box here, but like, so part of like, I had, sorry if you heard me say this before, but in November of 2021, I had a heart attack. And to this day, there are times when I take my blood pressure that I am terrified because the blood pressure was like the indicator that something was wrong. And I was trying to manage that. And then my blood pressure shot to a point that like was incredibly dangerous.
Right.
And that is a trauma response. And I always think it's so fucking dumb. Like every time I take my blood pressure, it's fine. But that's the thing. Trauma responses don't care about the logic of what you have. Trauma
Oh,
responses are just, here I am, motherfucker. You have to deal with me. And it's like what I deal with is a tiny thing compared to what
yeah,
they were dealing with.
because there's the fear that was instilled on purpose and the abuses they did to each other under his direction, I guess. But there's also like, I think when you are without a doubt the victim of something, it is really, really hard for the vast majority of people, and I am including myself in this because I don't think I'm that evolved, to say, I was the victim of this horrible thing, but inside of that, I did some fucked up things. I
Yep.
think it's really hard for most people. I think it's easier if you're like, you know, I'm a recovering addict, and while I was under addiction, I did horrible things to people, and I want to make amends because nobody, probably nobody was like holding you down and injecting drugs into you, right?
Right.
Probably go back far enough, there was a choice you made that got you there. If in fact someone was holding you down and injecting you full of drugs, and then as a result you did fucked up things, I think it'd be a lot harder to say, oh, I own the fucked up things I did. You know,
Yeah.
like, just, it's very like, to me, that's the mind fuck. And that's where I have so much empathy, because I don't know that I'd be able to do it, but it's so
Yeah.
necessary if they want to repair their family. And also, same thing with Isabella. She went to prison over this. With the exception of Talia, he worked on her the longest. He focused the majority of his time on working on her, keeping her awake, doing all these things. And yes, she made choices. And one of those choices was to help him assault Claudia. And now she's being punished for it. And I feel it's kind of the same thing that, but bigger, when we were talking about Nancy Salzman,
That was the
right?
person I thought of too. Yeah.
Yeah, because in the end, when you really see how she was treated and how it all came down on her, you're like, wow, Nancy was really the victim, but also she made choices. So, like, where is justice in that situation? And in Isabella's situation, I think it's even more complicated because it started when she was 18 years old and she's been under his control ever since.
Yeah. For a decade of her life. And we all know, like, when you're 18, you don't know shit. Like, you know some stuff, you know enough, but not, you don't really know how, and you're not really fully formed until you're like, as science now tells us, like 25, 26. That's not an insult to people who are 18. I was a dumbass at 18. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing.
Absolutely.
Like,
I was just thinking of like some of the guys that I got, like, that I went out with and got involved with. And it's like, man, I was like 2 inches away from being in Isabella's situation. Like, because
yeah,
I mean, I had no judgment.
yeah,
When you're
and
18, the judgment's like, oh, this guy or girl makes me feel funny in the bathing suit area. Let's go. You know,
yeah,
like, that's it. There's no more to it.
yeah.
You can, I mean, as an 18-year-old, I'm sure we all convinced ourselves there was a lot more to it. But in
Oh,
reality, there
sure.
wasn't.
We all thought we were brilliant. And listen, there are bits that when you're an 18 that you might be really brilliant at. Like that's that, but they're like you don't have a whole bunch of interpersonal experience yet. And that doesn't mean that you yeah, you don't mean you can't learn it. It's just it's a challenge because your interpersonal thing experience has been in high school, which is this kind of petri dish of stuff that isn't real world stuff because all the folks there are developing. Like so you don't have to. It's not the saying there aren't predators there because clearly, if you know, there are some teachers and pastors at schools that are predators. But I
Yes.
digress. But yeah, I felt bad for her because she just was still all in, and even when the threat of prison was there, she had actually talked about how she was. Well, I talked about maybe Talia and I. We could talk about, I'll have my kids and she'll have her kids, and I'm like, she's thinking of kids with Larry, and I was just like, that's
It's so upsetting to me because I think, so what helped, what turned Felicia around was a sense of self-preservation.
mhm.
Her lawyer said, "You can't live there. You can't be involved with these people. You can go to jail." And so she got away, and when she got away,
Start
the
to
time
untangle.
control and everything started to, very slowly undo itself. Isabella didn't even have that sense of self-preservation. And
No,
that to me is like, how, like, as human beings, that is kind of our main force.
fight or flight.
how broken do you have to be, or how scrambled does your brain have to be by somebody that when you are faced with, he's in jail, he is gonna get prosecuted. I think by the time the documentary was over, he already had been. And to say,
Yeah, it was because they told us in the documentary what he was sentenced to. So
that's right. So, yeah, to say, like, it's all over, nothing I say or do really makes a difference, but I am going to remain all in. I don't, I'm not going to protect myself. And the flip side,
it felt like she had a bit of hesitancy in that, a bit. Like she was afraid of prison. She was afraid of prison, which you should be. But like, there's also the bit like, and this is just a side note, like there was a bit where her lawyers tried to get her looked at as unfit for trial.
She refused.
And she refused. And they went and they did the evaluation, and the evaluator said, she's aware of what's going on. And the lawyer immediately like, yep, I'm moving to dismiss myself from this.
Here's the thing that I think a lot of people don't really understand about that, though. Brainwashing, high control like that wouldn't enter into competency at all.
No, like she was aware of what was going on. It wasn't like she wasn't aware. She was just so like brainwashed by him. She was just enamored with him.
Right. And because like legal competency just means like you were capable of knowing what you did was illegal, and you knew when you did it that you were doing it and it was illegal. That's it. That's all it means. It doesn't mean, I mean, it can mean like, it can get into mental illness, but it's really complicated. Like there's a reason that people don't plead insanity very often. We'll say that because it doesn't work. It's really hard to prove. But there's nothing like, and there's some really interesting documentaries about people who like got drug along crime sprees and stuff. There's nothing that precludes you from being tried or found guilty because someone else was controlling you. There's nothing.
Nope.
It doesn't matter. If you are an adult and you do it and you know that you did it and you know that it is wrong, that is it. That is all that matters in court. So there's no consideration that she is probably the most victimized of the group.
Yeah, my vote would have been Felicia, but Felicia got out.
Yeah, well, and I think, but he also had influence over Isabella for longer.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
And so, because remember, like it started, he was fun dad, cooking for everybody, and then spending 12 to 16 hours alone in a room with Isabella. That's how it started. And it's just really wild. I mean, I just have so like, as like a person, so much sympathy for her where I'm like, God, I wish like there was someone, because it couldn't be your mom or your dad because of Larry's manipulations, but there was someone in your life who was a little bit older, a little bit wiser, who would just go and fucking shake you and get you the hell out of there, like, because I think, like I said earlier, she is responsible for what she did. We all are, no matter what else is going on, and not just legally, but like in terms of you do something wrong, you are responsible to make it right. You can't make it right if you don't accept responsibility. But it's so hard because it's like, you look at this girl was 18 years old.
Yeah.
And, she goes to prison at 29. She hasn't had a moment outside of his influence.
Well, she had a little bit, but not much.
I think being on that property, they were still living by his rules.
And I'm sure he was calling her all the time too.
Yeah, well, there was a scene, right, where they were on the phone with him.
Yep.
So she wasn't really outside his influence. She wasn't necessarily under his control. She could make choices, but she made the choices that he would have made her make anyway. Like Felicia, when she moved out, she's like, isn't it great I don't have a lock on the refrigerator anymore? And I just, like, I really was like, that's weird, because in the house, they believe they have to have a lock on the refrigerator. Not because Larry wants them to, but because it is necessary for their safety. When she got away from the house, Like that was, I guess, like the first thing to fall.
Hmm.
Like, no one's gonna come in here and poison my food. Like
Yeah.
it's I don't know. I have a million complicated emotions about Isabella. I yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. Maybe being in prison because as far as I know, it's still illegal for people with felonies to write between prisons. So maybe she will get better in prison, which seems like the craziest thing to say because most people don't get better in prison. But in this
I
case,
did. I did.
well, there you go.
I'm a case study. Like I had a gambling addiction. I went to jail and that made me stop fucking gambling and I haven't since. But again, that is not the norm.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, recidivism is a real deal, and that's not that's more commonplace than people would like to
Well, I
believe.
would say just like with a mental health issue.
Yeah, that's a whole different.
And I think that mind control is a mental health issue, trauma, whatever. But in this case, it isolates her from his influence.
Hopefully, yeah. Hopefully, they can't write to each other, but
Yeah, I looked into this a while back for something I was writing, not because I was planning on going to prison. Um,
or had somebody you were fancying in prison. That
well, no, because both people have to be in prison for it to be in effect.
yeah. So don't do that. Stay
Yeah,
away.
that whole thing about like at least we'll be in prison together. No, you
Yep.
won't.
Nope.
Don't rob the bank.
Mm,
It's not as romantic as you think it is.
mm. You're
But
not
yeah,
Bonnie and Clyde.
yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we should. So we know that they got sentences. So Isabella and Larry both got sentenced.
She got 4 years too. Remember, that's like the magic number if you're in a cult and you get
4.5. Yep, she
yeah.
got 4.5. So
She got
yeah,
four.
because that's what Nancy Salzman got. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and uh, Allison Mack,
Mac. Yes.
she
So
got
she got 4. Nancy
4.
Salzman got 4.5.
There you
Don't
go.
ask me how I remember this because
Well, because
I
it's just because
I
remember we were talking about the difference in their sentences, which was only like 6 months, but it was weird. And then when that popped up that she got 4 years, I was like, is that just like the unspoken stuff?
the
That's
standard for
like,
your cult henchman like but our guy Larry, man, 60 years, no parole. And he's 63, so he's
yeah,
never
he's
getting out.
fine in prison.
Yep.
I'll drink to that.
Yeah. Good for you, you fucker.
I mean, again, I got a lot of complicated feelings about prison, but they don't apply to
Me
Keith and
too.
Larry, and they don't apply to Larry Ray.
No, and that's the thing is you could go like I have a lot of issues and comments and problems with prison and the prison industrial complex, but for someone like him, there are people that's like him and Keith Raniere and people like that. Those folks deserve that. Like, and I'm not a vindictive person, but the stuff they did to other people, they need to be away from other people.
I hate to say what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway because I finished my drink and that's all in my system. Um,
Are you college drunk yet or no?
well, no, because I decreased the amount of alcohol by a lot. But I think when you encounter somebody who, this isn't a custody case, this isn't a criminal case. They say this person cannot be evaluated clinically. They cannot be treated reliably.
Hmm.
We have to have a solution for that. I don't know what it is. And it's such a rare thing. Because like most people with a personality disorder, even a cluster B, which is like the scary ones, they're not really hurting people. They're hurting themselves for the most part. It is not like what we see in the movies. They're not all
Yeah.
serial killers. Some of them are just doctors because they have the ability to compartmentalize and they're great doctors for that or whatever. There's actually a study about that. That's why I said doctors, not because I have like a chip on my shoulder. Um, but to say this person is so manipulative that they cannot be treated, that is terrifying to me.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea that there's not really a solution for you. Like, what do you do with those folks?
The best case scenario of putting someone like that into therapy is that they will learn all the right things to do and say to manipulate people more effectively.
Yeah. And we saw that with our guy Larry Ray, whose real name was not Larry Ray. It was like Larry Greco or Greco or something like that. So, and I told you when he's like doing this, hey, what do you like him very like this Italian
Unibrow.
mafioso. It is a very Italian mafioso accent, and it was just annoying. Sorry, I find that really annoying, and I apologize to my
Me
Italian
too.
friends, but that
Gabagool.
really annoyed me. Yeah.
So, okay. Final thoughts, because we're getting close and I want to talk about next month.
Yeah. So final thoughts is, um, as I said, that was the most comprehensive breakdown of people I've ever seen by a cult leader, personally. Like from anything I've seen, from what we've watched, what we've talked about, like it just he ripped those people down to their shreds. Like just the
I
I
forgot to,
it was really it was. We always talk. It's a really hard watch. This was really fucking hard to watch. Just especially like Felicia, seeing just how just going from a person who is in a residency for a doctorate and just being like this just based
not a
human.
doctorate. She was a medical doctor
Yeah.
going because psychiatrists are medical doctors. So she'd already finished medical school.
Yeah. So she was
All
just
she
in a
had to do
residency.
was like be a low level psychiatrist for a couple years, and she was, yeah. And I
Yeah.
can't remember what they said
That,
the job is, but it's it's not a
yeah.
psychiatrist.
Yeah. But it just that to me was the most striking thing about this whole thing. And as goofy as it may sound, I would love someone to study that guy and figure out how the hell he did these kind of things. Like what was his like? How can you though? I'd like they just said you can't really work with him because he just manipulates everything. But like just to be able to figure stuff so you could kind of figure out a way to kind of ward that shit off would be nice. But
Well, I would say it's kind of the same thing as like to avoid it is the same thing as all the other ones. And that's what I was gonna say is like I wish I had thought about it before now to provide that bite model link again that breaks down like how to recognize a high control environment or person because it is really important.
yeah,
Because I think like even if you've never been in a high control relationship, job, or group, you have known somebody who has been, or you have known somebody who is the high control person. And I feel like, a lot of people think, well, I'm too smart for that, or I'm too savvy for that, or I know too much. But the reality is, almost no one ends up in a situation like this when everything in their life is going great.
yep,
People end up in these situations because shit sucks in their life, or they're in a period of transition, like going to college for the first time and not necessarily fitting in, or whatever. And yeah, it's just like, I don't think anybody is too smart for it. I think that probably if you are over 30, there has been a time in your life where you were low enough that somebody could have hooked you if they wanted to. Like there, but for the grace of God or the universe or whatever you believe in.
yeah. It's chilling. It is just because these kids were,
They
they were
were
going to
bright.
college.
Sarah Lawrence is not a shitty school. It's not a party school.
No, no, it wasn't. But yeah, so it can happen as unfortunately you can see is anywhere. You just get the right person, the right mix of shit, and the right mix of people, and that stuff can just go the wrong way really fast.
Yeah. I don't
So
know. This one was very sad to me. It was very upsetting. And
mhm.
I, like that's not to say like I think the only one we did that wasn't upsetting was Unarius, but it's like and parts of that were upsetting too, don't get me wrong. But it's like I think also I guess my final thought is one of the things that really disturbs me about it is because the group was so small, everything was so much more personal.
Yeah,
I think in a large cult, a lot of these abuses are happening, but there's like this like trickle down effect of like
yeah,
the guy
yeah,
in charge or the girl in charge tells you what is expected and what the punishments are, and then everybody kind of polices each other. And the control level is the same, but it's not as personal. In this little tiny house with a really small group of people and direct influence from the leader who is like picking at your biggest insecurities and your biggest emotional triggers, like it's so personal. And that's just really upsetting to me. And I don't know if I can like really articulate why, but it was much more upsetting to me than some of the bigger cults.
Well, you have basically it was like the inner circle, but the outer circle hadn't really been
There you
established.
go. Yes, because I was gonna say like I was thinking earlier today when I was thinking about that is like Nexium is huge, and so for the most part it was impersonal, and for the most part actually a lot of people weren't affected at all. But then that inner circle was really fucked up. And you're right. This is like if there was an inner circle, but there wasn't an outer circle.
Well,
And
he
he
did
did
say.
say, go ahead.
I think we are both going to say he did say he wanted to build an army.
That's exactly what I was
He
thinking.
just didn't get the opportunity to do so. So
Yeah. I feel like this is also a case of catching the infection before it spreads. Even though he had a long time, I think that it was probably only a matter of time before he like recocked and found a way to bring more people in, especially having his own property at that point.
yeah. So yeah, I agree. Upsetting, but I'm glad we covered it. I knew nothing going in about this one. I think you didn't know much
No, not
either.
really at all.
So it was a fun one. Fun being relative term, an interesting one to cover. So why don't you tell us about what we're covering next? Because I'm super excited about this
I'm
one.
super excited about this too, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know that much about this either, but that's part of the reason I'm excited.
Yeah, neither do I. Like I know rudimentary, but not a lot. So yeah,
Like we're not that far apart in age. As I said in the news, 30th anniversary of Waco started into February and continues to middle of this month, closer to the end of this month. Um, I watched it on TV. I was young enough that I didn't really know what I was watching on TV. I knew it was bad.
yeah,
Um, I have really weird memories of like people making jokes about Waco sounding like wacko.
yeah. I remember that shit too.
I did listen to a podcast about this. So I know a little bit about David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. But a podcast is kind of, you don't get a lot. It's kind of like if you got everything you know about a certain cult from us, like you're missing a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so
You get some nuance, but not a whole bunch.
yeah, and so there was, I guess last year, I think, like a dramatization of
Yeah,
the
it was
Branch
on Netflix.
Davidians, and now we have the documentary, and so we're going to cover the documentary, and I am really interested to see what that looks like to me as someone who remembers seeing the smoke on the news
Hmm.
and hearing these things, what that looks like to me now, having a better understanding of what happened, and then also getting those deeper details because there's a lot. I mean, I don't know, Doug. It's a weird one because there's a lot of like recent history that plays into it with the
Yep.
FBI fucking up, and then they fuck this up really bad. But then at the same time, it's a cult, and they were doing some really terrible things. And the worst things that happened weren't the FBI's doing, but it was kind of their fault. There's like so many layers to Waco. I'm worried we're not going to be able to cover it in one episode.
Yeah, I kind of am wondering maybe with now. Here's the thing: we're just going to use this Waco American Apocalypse as kind of our documentary guide for this.
Yes.
There's a zillion things you can watch or listen to about Waco, so we will get to as much as we can. I am excited because this is our first large cult that we're tackling.
Yeah, this is the first one that like everybody knows something about it.
Yep. So yeah. So next May 3rd, Wednesday, 9 p.m. We're going to start with this. I hope that we can get this all done in 2 hours. But yeah, listen, we're gonna miss stuff. That's just gonna be the way it is.
Yeah, we're
Uh,
just going to pick some points. I have
But
a fun fact that I'm dying to share, and I'm going to save it for the episode.
yeah, so do I, and it might be the same fun fact. So, but
I wonder.
I wonder.
Tell me after.
So yeah, so everybody, thanks again for joining us. This was Renee. I really truly enjoy doing this with you. Um, you make this just super fun for me because I like cults. You know way more about them than I do. It's like when Greg got me in Brothers and Booze, like he knows way more about beer than I do. But this is the thing. I enjoy talking about this stuff. It's it's fascinating to me, and I know it is to you. So thank you for joining me in this ride. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you, Doug.
Yeah. All right, folks. Thank you. We'll see you in a month.
Right.